Awesome. Okay, well, to get us started, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started writing.
Well, my first 10 years of my life, I lived in the Midwest, and my dad worked for General Electric. And so we moved every 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, I just remember my mother, wrapping the china in old newspaper and putting it to a box, and then the moving van would show up. And so
Wow.
books became a lifeline for me, because I was changing schools all the time and changing neighborhoods. And so I just love books from the get-go. And I've always loved to write. My first paying gig was when I was 8, and I have a twin brother, and he used to give me quarters to write his thank you notes to grandma for Christmas presents and birthday presents and things like that. So I saw, a career.
That's brilliant.
Career getting off the ground. Anyway, I was always writing poetry. I went to college back east, and I live in the Bay Area, and took some writing classes. And there was one of my professors really encouraged me to apply to Stanford Creative Writing Program. It's called the Wallace Stegner program at that time. And so I applied, and I got in, and I ended up living at home at that time because we lived right near Stanford, and my dad didn't want to pay for my rent.
Right.
So I lived at home while I was going to this graduate program in creative writing. And in those days, it was divided into 2 sections. There was the fiction writing section, and there was the poetry writing section. And it was a worksheet-based environment, and you got an MFA at the end of 2 years. And you also had to take literature classes. And so I'm, writing poetry, and my father, bless his heart, he's still with us. He's 90 years old. He comes in, this is a long time ago. He comes in and he says, I just don't think that writing poetry contributes to the GNP. And we had a big fight, and I went upstairs and I pulled out a dictionary and looked up GNP. I had no idea what he was talking about.
Right. That's what I was just thinking.
Gross national product. And, I heard he was really afraid that I just couldn't put a roof over my head writing poetry. So I got the message. And as soon as my program was over, I went into advertising, and I loved it. I love being a copywriter, because everything I wrote, unlike being a poet, everything I wrote got printed.
Yes.
And appeared in print, and I got a check for it. So I was a very happy copywriter for many years. And then I got married, and after my 3rd child came along, Danny, she's with us tonight. I really had a hard time still working full time. And so I was doing freelance work, but really not doing much writing. And I remember every New Year's Eve, I would vow to go back to doing more writing, and then I wouldn't do it. I was a soccer mom and all those things that you do when you're raising kids. Yeah. And then when the kids were getting a little older, I started taking fiction writing courses at Stanford. They had this continuing studies program. And in those days, you actually drove to campus. They didn't have an online, a robust online thing. And so I would leave the kids with their homework after feeding them dinner, and go over and take fiction writing classes. I was really putting poetry in the rearview mirror. And I had just some amazing teachers, they just changed my life. And so I did that for a few years, and I got my fix, and I kind of, and then years went by. And then in 2016, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it ended up being the best kick in the butt I've ever had in my life. I mean, I got the radiation treatments, and I just felt wildly alive. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to doing what I love most, and that was writing. And one of my teachers had encouraged me to apply to the Stanford novel writing program. And I did. I applied to the program, and I was accepted. And that was in 2017. It was all on Zoom. So way before COVID, I was like, Zoom.
Yeah, you were a pro at that point.
I was a pro, and had the most spectacular other writers. We had these great workshops, and I had amazing teachers, and one of them kind of became my mentor, and who actually edited the final draft of my book. So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, and so to go from doing the short poetry, copywriting for advertising, quick and snappy as much as you can, to now having to stretch that and write a whole novel. What were some of the challenges that you found doing that?
I could never have done it if I had not been in class. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
because, I'm not one of these people who organizes with index cards and who works with Scribners. I don't have those kind of organizational skills. I'm a pantser, as they say. But the beauty of being in a program like that is that, you study craft, like, well, you'll study dialogue, or you'll study, creating more tension in scenes, or better arcs for your characters, that kind of thing.
Right.
But what was really great about it was we had prompts, right? And they were due, you get a prompt on Monday and the assignment is due Friday. And so that's how I roll. I really, like having assignments. And so there'd be an assignment like, write a scene that makes you uncomfortable. And so I wrote a scene with hot sex. And like, and I thought, gosh, is there a way for me to fit that in my novel? I mean, it's kind of funny because a lot of the prompt exercises ended up being chapters in my novel. And, it's sort of a miracle that it all holds together. But another prompt was, okay, so do a layout of your protagonist's home, so that when she moves around in the house, it's consistent the way you describe her in the kitchen, the windows that she looks out of, where she watches TV, where she sleeps. And that was so brilliant because, I always knew where she was in the house when she was talking to her kids or yelling at her husband. I always knew where she was in space. And so these kinds of skills that, I learned it in school. I learned it in school. And so it made the whole thing so much more manageable, Then all these people that I met in the program, there were a few people that I just kept connecting with. I just liked the way they interpreted literature. I liked the feedback they gave. And so 4 of us had sort of a side gig, and we had a writers group. And that group has really been also a salvation for me,
Yeah. It's like having those peers just make it one. It's that group that you can always trust that they're going to give you good feedback, but they're also going to be there on that journey with you and help you sort of cope with the ups and downs that come with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I again, between the program and the writers group, I'm sort of nervous right now because I'm about to start my second novel and I don't have a lot of those same structures. So we'll see where it goes.
It's like, it's all on me now. It's so much pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. The good news is I'm still in touch with my teachers, and a lot of them are happy to give advice. So
that's awesome. That is like invaluable too, having those people that you can go to for advice and for feedback in that way.
Yeah.
So you said that you've always been a big writer, you've always loved writing, and it's followed you from, it's from college all the way to now, but were you also always a big reader?
Yes, I've always, it's funny because again, when we were moving so frequently, all the schools when I was a kid had something called the Scholastic Arrow Book Club. And I'm sure they don't have it anymore, or maybe they do, I don't know. But I would get this, little newsletter, and it would have like mysteries or biographies, and you just check the box and you get your mom to write the check. Like I would, check, mysteries, all these science fiction. I really liked science fiction when I was younger. And then I would add it all up, and I would tell my mom that she had to make a check out for $37.55, and then I'd bring it to school and they would mail it off. And then, this package of paperbacks would arrive on my desk. Yeah. I mean, you're young. You probably don't grow up with that, but that was the best. So right from the beginning, I was reading like that. And I also, when we got to California, when I was 10 or 11, there was a YA author named Zilpha Keatley Snyder. And she was she was from San Francisco, and she was this famous writer, and she wrote Season of the Ponies and The Velvet Room. And, I didn't have any friends when I first got here. So I would just read books.
They were your friends. They were there with you the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that. What was the first book that you remember loving?
Ah, I remember I was reading some sci-fi. Well, first of all, I love The Velvet Room by Sophocles Snyder.
Mhm.
It was about the Dust Bowl, I think. And this little girl they were migrant workers, and she discovered an old house with a library in it. And she would just get lost in the library. And I remember it just being so in her world. But other than that, I also really I went to a sci-fi stage. And
Mhm.
I remember thinking when I was a little girl that I would have telepathy. Like in all the sci-fi books, you could move things with your mind, and you could talk to people without having to move
Right.
your lips.
Mhm.
And I just thought that that was just going to happen when I got older. I I was a little confused by some of the sci-fi stuff.
I love it so much. So do you still read sci-fi?
I don't.
Hmm.
I really love women's commercial fiction, and I love literary fiction. I mean, I'm reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver right now, and I
Hmm.
bow down. She's just amazing. I just read Chemistry Lessons, also a copywriter, the woman who wrote Lessons in Chemistry.
Hmm.
She's a copywriter, and she became a debut novelist at 60, so we have a lot in common. But anyway, yeah, I don't read science fiction the way I used to, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, since In the Event of Death is not out yet, we have another week until it releases. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what inspired the book?
Sure. So it's about these two women. They're 45. They live in Silicon Valley in 2008, and they have this
Nope.
event planning business. And they're doing weddings in wine country and 50th birthday extravaganzas for the tech bros,
Hmm.
and bar mitzvahs for the stars. And all of a sudden the recession hits and nobody's planning parties. And
Right.
so they get a call from one of their old clients, and this man calls them and says, "My wife has died. I want you to put on her celebration of life." And so my protagonist, Liz Becker, is like, she's not down for that. She's not down for funerals. And her partner says, "But music, flowers, food, it's just like a wedding except
It's
the
just
bride
like,
is dead," right?
yeah. Hmm.
But the partner doesn't know is that Liz has this terrible fear of death because she lost her younger sister in a terrible childhood tragedy.
Hmm.
But she has to make a living. Her husband is a contractor. He's out of work. No one's building homes during the recession. No one is calling a contractor or a carpenter. So she has to pivot into this business,
Hmm.
put food on the table. And it's her journey to overcome her past fears. And there are these secrets, and there are these secrets in her family about how her little sister died, and those come to light too. And everything comes to light, and she overcomes her fears. And anyway, that's the premise. And the reason I got the idea, my mother, about 10 years ago, she was in great shape. She wasn't a smoker, and she got lung cancer and died in a matter of months. And
Oh my gosh.
I was putting on her memorial and writing her obituary and figuring out where to inter her ashes and all these things. And I thought, wow, people need help with this stuff. And in California, no one gets ahead of that stuff. You could be 90 years old and you still haven't thought about
Yeah.
you still haven't thought about death, because it's all about updating your iPhone, updating your computer. It's all about new stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
no one
Yep.
thinks about death. Like no one.
Yeah.
And so when
Death
people
is tomorrow's problem. That's not today's
exactly,
problem.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And I think there's sort of this feeling that we're all immortal here in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. Like we're gonna like figure out a tech solution to death. And so it takes everybody by surprise. And so I was going to go into the business of trying to help people, get ahead of it. Because
Yeah.
when you're grieving, you're grieving, and you're trying to, find a photo for your mother's obituary. I mean, anyway. And so I thought about going into the business, and I was going to do it with a friend. And she was on board, and her husband wouldn't let her do it. It's so taboo, right? Like death is so taboo. So I decided to write a book about it. And I think it's going to spark some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think especially since I feel like end of life celebrations is such a modern, quote unquote, modern concept. And so to put it in 2008, where really that's a very revolutionary thought, because people, going through a metaphorical death of losing money in the recession, and then also dealing with literal death and kind of bouncing back from that is like such an interesting place to explore from that 10-year out lens.
I think the COVID pandemic really brought death center stage.
Yeah.
And now there's death doulas, and there's, there are celebrations of life that are really joyous, it's always sad when someone's young, but if someone's lived a long life, you can cut up the rug and have some fun. Anyway, it's I think it's time for America to change the thinking around death.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it just makes it easier for the families when it comes down to it too. Like if it's a celebration version. So now I have to know that if you had been able to start the business, in addition, if this sparks the idea of bringing it back and you're like, I'm going to start this business after all, what would be your trademark element to your celebrations of life that you would want to put on for people?
So in my book, a man who's lived a long time. He's a pilot. He's a pilot for Pan Am. And so in the book, in the celebration, they have the waiters dressed as Pan Am stewardesses, and the waiters as pilots, and they played "Fly Me to the Moon" by Frank Sinatra, and so it's that kind of thing that I would love to do. Something that's really imaginative, and people don't wear black. They have martinis, and it really is a family gathering that is joyous. That's the kind of thing that I would sort of envision. I mean, it's crazy. I have written so many obituaries in my life. I just finished an obituary for a friend who died very suddenly over Christmas. And one of the things that his wife didn't want anybody to wear black. And he was a very passionate golfer, and he loved playing golf in Ireland. And so at the service, they played the bagpipes. And it was so emotional, and it was both emotional and joyful at the same time. Anyway, that kind of thing is really uplifting and heartfelt. And I kind of like that kind of flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's awesome. Well, now I know where to go when it's time. So you said that you're now thinking and working on book 2. What can readers expect from you next? What can you talk about, I guess, is a better way of approaching that.
Because in my first book, I was, I picked a setting that I was really comfortable with, Menlo Park. I picked a woman who's 45, who's had raising teenagers. I did that. I know that. So in this next book, I want to try something a little different. And I'm going to my main protagonist is going to be a 35-year-old man, and he's a pharmacist. Okay, because pharmacists know all kinds of secrets. They know who has STDs. They know who has terminal cancer. They know all kinds of things about the community. Now, it's probably going to be set a little bit in the past, because years ago, people had very intimate relationships with their pharmacist. Not so much now, because you have like delivery. Oftentimes pills are just delivered to your door.
Yeah,
in the
true.
old days, you often had a pretty intimate relationship with your pharmacist. And my pharmacist is he's living in the city, working like at a big CVS in like San Francisco or something. And he gets called back to his hometown because his uncle dies and leaves him the family pharmacy. And he doesn't really want to go back, but the woman he loves is still there. And she's married, but he still is drawn to this small town where she lives. And so he goes back and he's filling her prescriptions. And the first prescriptions that he fills for her are sleep aids like Ambien, right? And then they get more serious. He starts filling prescriptions for antidepressants. Realizes that she's unhappy. And maybe there's an opening for him in her life. So that's kind of what I got so far.
I love it. I'm like, I'm excited. It also could be a little creepy, which is fun too.
I know. So that's the thing. It's definitely, I have to set it up so it's not creepy. He's not stalking her. Like he sees her, he meets her in the store and everything, but then he sees that things aren't going well for her. And there's all this thing about, like, as a pharmacist, you have to be discreet. You have to take an oath to keep confidences. And so how does he deal with some of those confidences?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, before I turn this over to our readers to ask you some follow-up questions, I'd love to talk to you or ask you some of our questions that are called our fresh fiction facts.
Sure.
Say that 3 times fast is impossible. So they're just fun, light questions. Answer them however you feel. So what is your favorite? We know it's not sci-fi. What is your favorite genre to read?
Yeah, I think it would be literary fiction. I love Barbara Kingsolver or Louise Erdrich. The woman who wrote Hamnet was a beautiful writer. Yeah, so I would say I also love Ian McEwan. Atonement's one of my favorite books. So yeah, I would say literary fiction is my favorite genre.
Awesome, cool. Well, what is one genre that you'd never want to read again?
I don't think there is a genre like that. I don't read a lot of YA, but a friend of mine writes YA, so I'm getting more into it. And I haven't read a good mystery in a long time, but I should try that, I think, sometime. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open.
That's great. That's the best way to be. I'm open to all things that are new and flourishing.
Yeah.
What's your favorite time of day to write?
Morning. I'm a morning person. My brain works much better when I first wake up. Like, I can do Wordle and in a couple minutes at the beginning of the day, and it takes me hours at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, yeah, you're like brain mushy, can't.
Yeah, there's this huge performance difference between like 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So.
Yep, I completely understand that. What is your favorite time of day to read?
Now that's an afternoon thing for me. Because that's if I've been productive during the day, I give myself a little reward, and I read in the afternoons or the early evenings.
Love it. Oh, so relaxing. All right. So who was your first book boyfriend or girlfriend?
Well, like I said, I really liked Kate Snyder, but I also liked the woman who wrote Annie Dillard wrote a book called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And she was a naturalist, and my grandmother was a naturalist, and so I really loved books that talked about nature.
I love that. Yeah, I love nature. What is one luxury item that you can't live without?
A hot bath, especially with bubbles. The tension with the bubble bath and trying to read is like, you're so afraid you're gonna get your book wet, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I usually manage to keep it dry. So,
do you ever do audiobooks?
Yes, I do. There was a book written, it's called Bad Blood, about Theranos, that woman who,
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah. So I listened to that because a lot of that took place in my neighborhood, that book. And I would walk my dog and just listen to all this crazy stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. You're like, I know, it's like right there. That's the house.
I don't read really, I don't read literary novel. I don't listen to literary novels. I want to see the.
You want to see the words.
But if it's a book that's kind of a thriller, or if it's nonfiction, then I'll listen to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like listening to nonfiction a lot more too. It's usually my preferred. All right, so let's see. How are you going to celebrate your debut release?
Well, it's coming out on the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day. So we will have chocolates and champagne.
I love it.
It's weird it's coming out the 14th because it's not a romance novel, but whatever.
It's just a Tuesday. For that, it's a Tuesday, I guess.
Exactly.
What is some advice that you would give to your younger self?
Gosh, stop beating yourself up about not writing. As Danny, my daughter is listening. So many times on New Year's Eve, I pledged to write more, and then I didn't. I would feel so bad about it. But life is busy. I was trying to raise 3 kids, and so I would tell myself just to slow down and take it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's excellent advice, and we all should take advantage of that. So when you write, do you listen to a playlist? Do you have like music in the background?
Absolutely not. No.
I love it.
It has to be pure silence, because I've got to hear the dialogue. I've got to hear the meter, because I started out as a poet. I really care how it sounds in my head,
Mhm.
So no, dead silence.
Oh man, how do your characters come to you? Do they speak to you, or do you see them like as a flash in front of you? Like,
Like when I'm describing a character, I usually think of some friend or acquaintance, and then work around that because I want them to be consistent. I want their hair to look the same, their eyes to look the same. So I have a friend who is hilarious, and my main protagonist, Liz Becker, is she's sort of a dark person. She's kind of a martyr, and her partner is hilarious. And so I have a friend who's really, really funny. And I sort of think about her when I write this character, when I wrote that character. And then some of the characters just kind of show up. Because I was working on all these prompts, they just sort of show up because I'm meeting a deadline. And so they just, it's going to be hard. Again, it's going to be harder for the second novel because I don't have all these timelines that I have to meet. But it is true that the creative process, there is sort of this thing that, I remember reading, some woman said, oh, her characters just, they write the story for her and it's not that hard because that is not
they
true.
just show up. Yeah.
They just show up. Yeah.
They just arrive.
And I just write down what they say, that is not true. But there is something to that once you start creating these characters and their backstories, they sort of propel themselves through the fiction because if they're plausible people, they just sort of have their own life. There is some truth to that.
Yeah. So how do you unwind after a particularly good or bad writing day?
I usually go for a walk with my dog. Yeah. Or I go for a run, or my husband makes me a martini.
Those are all
my husband is a brilliant bartender. So lucky me.
Exactly. I was like, it's nice to have a man with skills in your house.
Totally.
It's very helpful.
It's Cosmos are to kill for. Yeah.
So before I turn it over to our readers, how can readers stay in touch with you and find out more about you?
Okay, so I actually wrote that down because I always forget. My website is kimberly-young.com. And if you go to my website, you can find out where to order my books and some background on me. And then my Instagram is Kimberly Young Author.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, Kimberly, thank you. Excuse me, I got the hiccups all of a sudden. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn this over to our readers to ask you some follow-ups.
Great. Thank you. It was fun.